So what we've got to do as individuals is to accept emotionally, physically, in all the ways that there is a natural moral law. There is a law of human nature. And then we've got to get busy living it. And then we've got to get busy teaching it. C.S. Lewis says there's a big problem with this law of nature. Human beings all over the earth have this curious idea that they ought to behave in a certain way and cannot really get rid of it. But they do not, in fact, behave that way. They know the law of nature and they break it. So we know certain things that we ought to do, and the primary way that we know what we ought to do is through our conscience. This is God's set of rules for success. C.S. Lewis said it this way: moral rules are directions for running the human machine. Every moral rule is there to prevent a breakdown or a strain or a friction in the running of that machine. That is why these rules at first seem to be constantly interfering with our natural inclinations. When you're being taught how to use any machine, the instructor keeps on saying, no, don't do it like that, because of course there are all sorts of things that look right and seem to you the natural way of treating the machine, but do not really work. So of course it seems very natural that we should do all kinds of things that feel pleasurable, that sound fun and exciting, but they are contrary to the best way to run this glorious machine that we've been blessed with. God's the creator. He knows how to help us run the creation. Okay, so what we need to do before we can learn about first principles or any of the other wonderful tools that you're going to get today is we have to first decide within ourselves that we are going to listen to our own consciences. This is the first key. This is what the greatest gift that God has given us to know what we need to do. The problem is, in fact, Tolstoy, Gandhi, a lot of others, they said the voice of conscience is the voice of God. The problem is, you've probably heard this before, maybe you've thought this before, had this concern, it sometimes seems like that people's consciences tell them different things to do. So how do we resolve that concern? How do we say there's a law of human nature, we intuitively know that it exists, we have a conscience that's trying to help guide us to live in harmony with that natural law, but people's consciences tell them different things? Stephen Covey had a friend who said to him one time, there are times when I feel like it's best to ignore my conscience and listen to my common sense. And Covey was like, that's really kind of weird. What do you mean? And he said, well, so for example, my parents taught me that if I run a stop sign, I need to circle the block 3 times and stop at the stop sign every time to make penance for running the stop sign. And so if I don't do that, I feel guilty. My conscience tells me I need to go back. But when I really think about it, my common sense says, no, it's okay. I can just keep driving. The reason that this happened, and when I first read this from Stephen Covey, man, it cleared up my thinking so quickly, and I hope it does for you as well. He taught that there are actually 2 consciences. He said there's a divine conscience and a social conscience. He said the divine conscience is the true one, the light God has given to every person who comes into the world. The social one is given to us, but this one comes from our human experiences, our upbringing, the culture surrounding us, made up of norms, mores, traditions, values, and beliefs, and from the level of obedience to the divine conscience. If we do not obey the divine conscience, it is gradually subordinated by the social one. Whatever the focus and content of the social one becomes the center of that person's life. So, we are given this divine conscience, God's rules for right and wrong written on our hearts that are given to us at birth. But it can be silenced. It can be beaten down. It can be ignored until it becomes so quiet it's almost impossible to hear. And the social framework, the social conscience, tells us what's right and wrong. And so this is where we have the opportunity to educate Covey talks about educating the divine conscience so that it speaks so loudly you can ignore the social conscience altogether. He says, what my friend called his conscience was actually his social conscience, and what he called common sense was his divine conscience, a frame of reference of correct principles, spiritual and temporal, which he had already received. So I counseled him, I encouraged him to tap divine sources to educate his conscience, and assured him that in so doing, he would make it strong until he became more and more acquainted with that voice, and that as he continued to follow it, he would feel his reason confirming his feeling, and vice versa, which would leave him feeling peaceful and settled. And you know, in my education, it was really fascinating to me because I kept reading these greats, and so many of them talked specifically about, I have a podcast on Suzuki, one of my very favorite stories, where he talks about how he types on the typewriter and he feels super guilty, and he runs to the bookstore and he finds Tolstoy, and Tolstoy says, the voice of conscience is the voice of God. And in that moment, he decided, I will always obey my conscience. And these great men and women, I believe, you see common traits in them. You see common ways of responding to the world. You know, I don't know how many have ever read Left to Tell. It's in level 1 of the academy, but this woman is locked in this bathroom for 3 months, and all she does is nurture herself spiritually. And when she steps out of that bathroom, she is this unbelievably strong moral authority who can walk next to machete gunfire and not flinch. Our ability to educate our conscience and make it so strong and vibrant and clear sets us apart from the social conscience. It helps us put the social conscience in context and not feel so pulled by it and so confused by it. Covey gives us a few ways that we can educate our conscience, and I'm going to go through them really quickly because I thought it was fascinating how well it matched up with so many things we do here at the Mission Driven Mom. First one, obviously, listen to it and follow its directions. Just do what your conscience is telling you to do so you can begin to discern when it's talking to you. He emphasizes also that we need to learn and practice these. It's like building any kind of muscle. You learn, you listen, you commit, you act, you take stock, you figure out where you went wrong, you listen again, you recommit, you practice, and so on. He also encourages scripture reading, and I loved what he said about this, so I want to quote him. Regular and prayerful scripture study is like putting on the glasses of the Lord. It will influence all you look at, see, and do. While you study how he deals with his children, you will better understand how he deals with you. Another thing that we can do is study the lives of great men and women who left the world better than they found it, whose lives are worth emulating. Get their stories into your head. Let their behavior inspire yours. Let them elevate you. You choose your company. Every morning when you wake up, you choose who you're going to spend time with, what you're going to watch, what music you're going to listen to, who your friends are going to be, what you're going to read, where you're going to go. And you can elevate yourself by spending time with people who elevate you.